I don't want to get bogged down in immigration. It's a stupid topic.
Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig and Sonny Lohman. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are
And
you?
thanks.
Good, good. Well, boring as it may be, we'll go ahead and talk about the immigration topic anyway, since it's been in the news and some people consider it slightly more important.
I think he said stupid, not boring.
Okay, all right.
It's stupid.
He might actually mean boring, but he says stupid anyway because he doesn't have a very large vocabulary.
Ooh.
I have this value, it's in the disvalue. But there has been a lot going on with immigration. Obviously, in the past few weeks, there were riots out in LA, and this is Trump trying to get his immigration policies implemented and getting quite a lot of pushback. And William's laid up today. That's why he's not on video, but he's a trooper for doing the show anyway. Both of you are actually in Southern California. So, I just a little bit of flavor of anything you've been seeing or noticing.
Well,
Go ahead, William.
yeah, well, I used to live 10 minutes from downtown. Now I live about 15 minutes from downtown. So I've lived in Southern California, especially around the LA area, my whole life. I was born in San Gabriel Valley, which is just a few minutes from downtown LA. And we've had riots, over the years. And so I'm kind of familiar with, what happens during these riots and why they happen. And usually they're sparked by some police brutality or arrest or something. And then, this mostly the Black population, takes to the streets and riots. But this time it's different because it's the immigrant Hispanic community or Mexican community, and they're protesting the ICE arrests. And I think this is much different than the past riots because this one is actually, very political. And it's not necessarily against all cops. You know how Antifa is against all law enforcement, all cops, but this was primarily aimed at ICE. And so there's a weird dynamic here going on where you have the Hispanic or Mexican population, immigrant population protesting ICE, but then you also have Antifa getting involved, and they're trying to convert these protesters into violent communist anti-law enforcement people who are just, against LAPD and anybody who's trying to control, exert authority over the streets, and so that's my view of it, is that there's this weird dynamic going on now that we didn't have in the past.
Sonny?
As far as like what I've seen firsthand, I saw the No Kings protest, which I think is that's related to this. It's the same group. What all of this is there is this deep state. This is my view, I guess. There is a deep state, maybe some foreign actors, some millionaires, billionaires getting involved to try to change or keep the current establishment running. Actually, I think that's more what it is because they weren't doing this when Biden was in office. This is all about any kind of change from the status quo. They don't want that. And which I find interesting. I mean, Biden deported some people, Obama deported some people, but they don't protest until it's Trump. So it's all kind of, it's all ginned up by the left and it's their minions. And of course they called out Antifa because that's part of, so these are the manufactured protests. The one with the Hispanics in LA, I mean, that to me looked, I didn't necessarily see Antifa. I saw violent illegals and criminals, maybe with Antifa alongside them, but I don't know that it was just Antifa being violent. There was an anti-ICE, also anti-LAPD, but they were helping ICE, and that's what I think sparked it, right? They didn't want the local law enforcement to help and assist with protecting ICE as they went about their business, and then they were attacking both. So, but here in Laguna Beach, where it's like a beach community and nothing ever happens, there was a very large gathering for No Kings. Huge. I that's the biggest protest I've ever seen in Laguna Beach. And I don't know if they're getting paid or I honestly don't know how they managed to get such a big crowd because I don't see this as a very favorable issue. I don't really think that those people are protesting the immigration issue. I think they're protesting Trump. It's basically a no Trump rally.
And one difference is that the local authorities, and maybe this is like 2020, seem to be giving at least somewhat tacit support to the protesters. Sonny, to your credit, you found a compilation of lefties in the media claiming the riots were overblown, and it's juxtaposed with scenes from the riots from YouTube channel Black Pigeon Speaks. Full credit to them, though.
I think he took it from somebody else, though. I just
right.
Yeah.
It's them, and we're going to put a link up to it. But I did edit the end a little.
The LA County Police say that they have it under control. Carrying a flag is not illegal, as you know. What did happen in 1992 was so different from what we're seeing now. I mean, that was a real riot.
Video after video has shown that these agents are the ones provoking protesters and also making up, aggression by these protesters that later video shows people were not aggressive.
We are having an administration that's targeting peaceful protests, people that are there to protest. The president is sending the National Guard because he doesn't like the scene.
There was zero reason to use troops in Los Angeles, zero reason to bring out the National Guard, zero reason to bring out the Marines. There was no threat to the city of Los Angeles, and certainly no threat that the city authorities could not deal with.
Well, there's could not and would not, right? I mean, it's probably true that the city could deal with what was happening, but they would not. And because they're in on it. I mean, they're all the same. That's their side. Karen Bass loved what she saw. And Trump has to protect. Do the federal agents get to enforce federal law, or don't they? I guess.
Right.
And if they,
and how much do you give in to the mob to make them not riot? What other laws don't you enforce?
So there's so much context here that Yaron and people who agree with him just ignore. There's, first of all, they bring in the federal soldiers or the National Guard to support the ICE, so they protect the federal buildings, which reduces some of the load that would normally be put on the LAPD or the sheriffs. If the
who have
National
regular
Guard,
crime to deal with.
Yeah, if the National Guard wasn't there protecting the federal buildings, then massive amounts of LAPD cops would have to be doing that job, right? So that would take away their ability to then go chase the vandals and the rioters, which they're doing now. And so I think that's the main purpose here, is to help to assist the LAPD, even if they aren't asking for it. It's Trump is doing this not to instigate anything. There's an actual reason for doing this, which is law enforcement and helping the local PD. And so that's the main context or one of the main aspects of this context that Yaron ignores and doesn't even factor into the equation. So since the National Guard was brought in and then the Marines, the LAPD can just chase down and beat back these rioters. And you see this with them, taking the streets back.
Yeah, and the literal streets. They were on the freeway, and if they all had to be at the federal building, they wouldn't have been able to stop that.
And with the massive amounts of cops that they can deploy now, since they don't have to be protecting federal buildings, they can now protect other buildings, city buildings, and then surround the rioters in all the streets and box them in and then arrest them en masse. So this is a critical component to squelching the riots. And also another factor I wanted to bring into this is that, the ICE, even though LA was a sanctuary city, and I think they stopped that now. I read a news article about them making it not a sanctuary city anymore, but it was a sanctuary city. And so they're not going to help the feds, so if ICE needs help, they can't rely on the local law enforcement. So that's another component to this that isn't being factored in. And one of the reasons why Trump brought in the National Guard, because ICE needs help, and so they're going to get it from somewhere. They got to get it from the federal soldiers.
Why are all the lefties and Yaron so against the National Guard? It's eerie how easily he fit in.
I have the answer to that.
Lefty talking heads. Go ahead.
They don't like the law. They don't, it's not about the tactic or, because if they were in favor of the law that was being enforced, they would be fine with it. And I think the reverse would be the case. Like if they had sent in the federal government to enforce some horrible tyrannical law that I thought, coming from the federal government, I'd be like, hey, states' rights, it's like it all comes down to what do you think is the right thing? And in terms of immigration, it is a federal law because California can't let in, let's say, 1 million Chinese. That's an army that would then invade, Nevada. Like you have to have an agreed upon, if you're part of the union, I believe immigration is really a central issue that you have to agree about on a federal level. You can't just do what you want. I'm really in favor of almost everything being done in the states that can be. I think the central government's out of control, but that is one thing I agree that the federal government should have, and the Congress should have say over. And the people who are against this want the open border. They want all of those people that came in without being vetted, who we don't know, the criminals and everybody else, whether they're hard workers or whatever, we don't know. They want them all here.
Even prominent objectivists like Augustina Sid and Yaron Brook have said that, there was a crisis when they were all just coming during Biden. So there's obviously, a point at which it's too much all at one time. When it comes to Rand on immigration, she said she was for no restrictions, but admits the issue is more personal to her.
Above all, aren't you dropping a more personal context? How could I ever advocate that immigration should be restricted when I wouldn't be alive today if it were?
Yeah, so that's
okay. So let's reverse that. How could we advocate for it if that means we're not going to be alive if we don't lock it down somehow, if we don't have restrictions? I mean, she's speaking from, I guess, a place of self-interest, and we have that right as well.
Right. But, it turns out that from my understanding of history, she got here more because the Soviet Union temporarily dropped their emigration restrictions and that she had family over here. But, there were already new immigration restrictions that had just been passed in like 1924, 2 years before she got here. And she came over under those restrictions.
The problem with this clip that ARI put out is that it completely drops all context of her immigrating to the United States and tries to pass off her view as being for open immigration the way ARI sees it today, when in fact, her statement is just completely false. She says, and it's justifiable because she was speaking off the cuff, answering a question, and she wasn't really addressing the details of immigration. she was, like she said, giving some personal context or personal opinion. So she hadn't researched this or done a full-blown article on it or anything. And so what she says that she wouldn't be alive today if immigration were restricted. Well, that's completely false because in 1926, immigration was severely restricted. There was the Immigration Act of 1924, which put national quotas on different countries. People immigrating from different countries, or quotas. And also there was Asians were basically, effectively excluded from immigrating because they were ineligible for citizenship. The act also established the U.S. Border Control or Border Patrol, sorry. And in 1926, 31,000 people were deported. And there were like about 30,000 people were deported every year after that for several years. So it wasn't as if there was some great open immigration where everyone could come. And so that's why Ayn Rand made it here. First of all, she lied to the Soviets saying she would return and marry some fictional fiance she had. And then when she got to America, she married in order to get, permanent citizenship. So it's not like there weren't restrictions. There were many restrictions, and there was a visa requirement too. So you had to get a visa, and if you overstayed your welcome, you were deported. If you didn't have a visa and entered the country, you might be deported. So it's just not true. And I think it's a grave injustice that ARI is doing to Ayn Rand's legacy by trying to paint her as this great open immigration advocate.
Well, speaking of different contexts, this is from Leonard Peikoff, the founder of ARI, speaking at his 2013 debate on immigration with Yaron Brook. And Sonny, to your point, he also makes it a question of survival.
In this stage, things are threats to the country that would not be at the beginning. If any group were to come in and really increase the influence of the Democratic Party, much as I loathe the Republicans, but if they did that, I would say that in itself is sufficient grounds to exclude the group. That in itself. And it's not an issue of, judging people by their ideology. It's judging people by how much power they can wield as part of a coalition of people who want to knock you dead and take over this country.
Yeah, I think, what he's really pointing out here is that this increase of power of the Democrats that immigrants might wield is really about socialism, because the Democrats are the vanguard of the socialist movement in this country. And a lot of them just call themselves democratic socialism straight up. So if you have a bunch of immigrants that are socialists and they come in this country and they are helping the Democrats by being socialists, that's the problem. See, I'm against allowing socialists to become citizens. I mean, they can visit, but I don't want them to become citizens. So if they're coming here and staying illegally and then somehow voting, illegally, that's a problem. And so you need to address that with your immigration.
Well,
and as far as visiting though, how many can visit? Can 100 million visit? It's like some of this has to do with objectivists have this issue where they want to look at everybody as an individual, which we do. But in groups, people do have a certain nature. And it's just like, you can't have enclaves of socialists. You can't have enclaves of barbarians, Haitians eating your cats and dogs. Like you can't subject the American people to that. And Ayn Rand, whatever she said of her own personal thing, like it's such a short clip. It's so out of context. And personally, what I care more about is her philosophy, the one that I can read and understand, and her ethics of self-interest. And we absolutely have a right to say this is not in our interests and we're not doing it. And a government is sovereign, and it is about the people who are the citizens of that nation. And those people can get together and say, we don't want to let in any socialists, especially don't want to give citizenship to a socialist. And the Democrats have proven, even more so today than when Peikoff said that they are the enemy of America, of our of all of, the attacks on free speech alone and the way they dealt with COVID and everything. I mean, I'm sorry. If you don't see by now that giving them more power in any way is a clear and present danger to your own children and your own family, and then what I get in response is, oh well, this the hard worker who's been here for 10 years and he's illegal, but he works hard and he's contributing and he has kids and all that. If that's not altruism, what is?
I mean, I get that. And that's why I think, you can't just have a policy of, oh, if you don't catch them at the border, they're just here forever. We've got a clip later on where we get into that. But to me, part of the issue is that people would come over here as individuals. And yeah, they would have their own communities like, Little Italy or, Chinatown or whatever. But it just that was within New York City where there was still a big majority. And now you've got these places like Maine or Minnesota where they've just decided to take a city and just populate it with all Somalis, for example, and just, put them all there. So all of a sudden you're displacing as if, there's not any sort of limit on the rate of cultural change that one can be expected to adapt to. And it's not against the Somalis, but putting them in, it makes them the dominant group in that area.
I'm from Minnesota, so I'm going to speak on this, and this is partly why I'm I am so passionate about this issue, because I saw what happened. And as one of my personal heroes is Ayaan Hirsi Ali. So nobody is going to say, oh, you got a problem with the individual Somali. I don't. What I have a problem with is you take a society and you have to think of it. These things, these are facts of reality. You had a society of Northern European, Scandinavian types, high welfare state, lots of honor system stuff within those communities. And then you throw in, and by the way, individualists, and then you throw in, these are the people who voted for Jesse Ventura. They're not even really, yes, they kind of go Democrat, but they're not really that hardcore kind of like that. And then you put in 100,000 very tribal, very organized, literal gangsters into the community. And their vote is for sale, they're a block and they vote and all of this is proven. I'm not making this up. There's video that they were collecting the ballots of their community and they were voting in a block in a pay for vote sort of scheme once they got the vote. And shock, the entire state and city governments are now run by hardcore communists. They're not Somalis, but they're Tim Walz, with his incredible past and record, has been reelected. After what happened in 2020, he was reelected after he let the city burn down. And that's because he can count on an organized minority of votes. And those Somalis clicked right into that organized minority of communists. And the disorganized majority of just Scandinavians are they don't fully understand what's happening to them,
I was just going to say quickly, you can have an Ayaan Hirsi Ali in that group, and if they're coming over as part of the collective, she can't even be as free as she was by just leaving individually. She's still got worries about Sharia or what's going to happen if potential honor killings.
I'm telling you, they are gangsters. And you go into any coffee shop in Minneapolis and you will see the Don and his little group of men. And you see the signs of this everywhere. And then they are scamming every welfare program. They're taking out tens and hundreds of millions of dollars out of the system because they are every single welfare thing they're scamming. They're finding a way to scam it because that's what they're literal gangsters. And that is how they functioned in their towns in Somalia. And now they're doing it here in Minnesota.
I want to relate this to the recent LA ICE riots, because it's a similar thing going on. But what's at the root of it, I believe, is the lack of assimilation. Like in the past, people would come over mostly in small groups or families, and they would come here because America was great and they wanted to assimilate into our culture. But that's not going on a lot these days. Like you say with the Somalis in Minnesota, they don't care about American culture. They want to bring their nasty culture to our country. And the same thing's going on in Southern California and areas of the Southwest with the Mexicans who don't want to assimilate with American culture. They think that Mexico, like California, should still be part of Mexico. And that's why they're flying the Mexican flags, because they don't respect America. They don't think this is America. They want this to be Mexico. So why would they fly the American flags during their riots? No, they have come in here as invaders. And that's why it's proper for Trump to call it an invasion in some aspect, in some regards, because especially with these Mexican invaders who are trying to take over the streets here, take over the police, take over the communities. And that's kind of how it relates to Antifa, because Antifa also doesn't want to live in America. They want a communist country. And so they aren't going to fly the American flag. And they kind of relate to the Mexican invaders in that way. They're both fighting against America, against the U.S. government. And that's why they're completely anti-law enforcement. They don't care if it's the LAPD or the county sheriffs or ICE or the National Guard or the Marines. They'll fight them all.
When you go ahead, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I'm just saying this is more like, a revolt, or
it's more like a revolt. Yeah, it looks like that. And then they were like, oh, we got to put those away. And they were handing out American flags because they realized that, we can't let these people actually show their viewpoint.
Well, that's the people with some common sense in the riots. That they may not be the violent ones. So they have the half Mexican and half American flag, which is ridiculous. But they're trying to put a better face on the protests, because they realize that these invaders who are just flying the Mexican flags and burning electric vehicles, they're the ones who are the enemy. They're the ones who are the enemy of the U.S. So that's not a good look if you're trying to convince people that ICE should change their tactics or we should let illegal immigrants stay here. It's not a good look if you're flying the Mexican flag and burning buildings and stuff.
Just getting back to what some prominent objectivists have said on the issue. Back in 2008, Yaron tried making the case that having open immigration outside of terrorists, criminals, and the diseased would lead to increased security against anyone sneaking in. This video was erased, but we did find it via the Wayback machine.
I think it's good for security. A big deal about closing our borders is the issue of security. Because if somebody wants to come to America to work, they just walk across, they prove that they're not a criminal or terrorist or carrying an infectious disease, and they could come into the country. So who's going to sneak into the country? Who's going to try and sneak in? Well, only one class of people. Those who want to inflict harm on Americans. Shoot them at the border if that's what's necessary. Because as soon as they're trying to sneak in, it means they're criminals or they're terrorists. It's easy to patrol the border when only a few people are trying to get in. It's impossible today for security reasons to try to patrol the border when millions of people are trying to get in. When you know the people sneaking in are crooks, it's easy to handle.
I can see why he scrubbed this from the Ayn Rand Institute YouTube page.
Yeah,
he's coming down sounding pretty rational there, and it's not good for his image to sound rational.
Well, shoot them at the border if they're sneaking in. They're up to no good, so just shoot them is pretty opposite of what he's saying these days.
Well, the young kids would call it based.
He didn't even mean it. It's a rationalistic approach. It's like, okay, if you have open immigration for everybody, then only bad people will come in, so you can do whatever you want to them. But it's like, you can't always properly screen for criminals and terrorists immediately. I mean, maybe they had a clean record before. It's tough to get accurate records in some countries. Maybe there's some corruption, or they're using a fake ID. There needs to be time for deeper checks than, just, this guy says he hasn't committed a crime and has good intentions. Let him in.
Well, he's also recognizing limitations on crossing the border. You can't let criminals in and terrorists, and you have to check for diseases and stuff. So that's all pretty rational, but he's only focusing on the physical threats.
But
And
once they're here, I
want
guess we can't deport them.
Well,
they got here. Now what? We can't support ICE.
I want to focus on ideological threats, because that's the main threat these days. Is we have all these socialists and people who think that California should be Mexico. We have all these ideological foes crossing the border, and we can't have that. If we want to maintain any semblance of what America stands for.
I disagree. I think there's a physical threat there too. I mean, yes, but also I saw footage yesterday and I saw this before during the Biden regime as well. There were Iranian men, healthy looking Iranian men streaming across the border, and somebody was filming it and talking to them, and they're here. And so now we're attacking Iran. And now what? Is this a sleeper cell? Like, are we going to get an army starting to attack our cities? Because, you know what I'm saying? Like, we don't even know what we let in. We don't know.
Well, just to your point, go ahead.
I mean, if they're criminals and, crossing illegally, then yeah, you stop them. But I also want to check for, just at the ports of entry, I want to check for ideological threats.
Yeah.
So that, I think that's one of the key elements here, is if you can identify the ideological threats, then that will be the physical threat, because they're here to cause harm.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, but even if, like, let's say you're a country that we're ideologically, I mean, are we ideologically sympathetic with any country? But let's say it's, I'm just trying to think of somebody we don't really have a problem with. Like,
well, we don't have a problem with people who are anti-abortion or something. That's not a threat against the country. I'm talking about people who want to revolt against our country, like communists. So communism is still an ideological check in the immigration process. They still ask you, I believe it's on the form, like, if you have any relationship with communists or something.
Self-attestation is just not good enough for and plus the other thing is what they've done is they've said, oh, well, you can just declare asylum. It started under Obama, where they get captured, but then they just say asylum, so then they just bring them in anyway, even after they catch them. In fact, the other day, Yaron was asked if he thinks deportation was even a valid penalty for illegal immigration. And this is one of those where I think he's kind of taking both sides of the answer.
Is deportation a valid penalty for illegal immigration? Yeah, I guess it's a. I don't think it's the appropriate penalty. I don't think illegal immigration, particularly if the illegal immigrant is not working and sustaining themselves, is something anybody should care about or be concerned themselves about. But yeah, if you catch somebody at the border sneaking in and they haven't gone through the process, deport them immediately. But should you be going out there rounding illegal immigrants up and deporting them? No. Waste of money, waste of time, waste of resources, and a violation of the rights of Americans and the immigrants and so on. Catch them at the border, send them back, fine.
I don't understand this selective law enforcement idea. Like, so if it's a hardworking guy, we shouldn't deport him for breaking our law. But if he's a criminal, then we can deport him. But we really can't even round up the criminals because they're intermixed with the hardworking people. And so we just have to deal with it now that they're here. And I mean, it's the most, if you run a society this way, there is no law and order. There's no blind justice. I'm sorry. that's one of our founding things is a country of laws, not men, right? You break the law, you pay the consequence. End of story. If you break into my country, if you break the immigration laws, I'm not really concerned about anything else. You pay whatever penalty and consequence that is. Don't give me your sob story. I don't care. It's like if I let exception after exception after exception after exception, then I have no border, I have no laws, and I've got criminal aliens in my country.
And this is from the no one is above the law crowd. When Yaron is asked the question, he's like, yeah, I guess. And he's like, well, it's valid, but not appropriate. So,
and then he says well, yeah, you should deport them, but you shouldn't actually physically do it. Unless you can like hold out your hands at the border, but once they've gotten across, I guess your hands are tied
forever. Yeah.
And well, whatever. I mean, he obviously does not agree with it.
Shoot them at the border, they're citizens.
Exactly. Oh my God. It's like
quite an evolution in his opinion here. He used to think of them as criminals sneaking across the border, but now they're just hard workers, and if you don't catch them at the border, just leave them alone. But this is crazy. He doesn't realize he drops all kinds of context here. It's like, first of all, why are they crossing the border illegally? And second of all, what are they doing in order to get these jobs? You can't have a job when you're an illegal. So they're stealing identities in order to get a job, which is another crime. Or they're not working under the table, not paying taxes and all that. And even though objectivists are against taxes, why should they not pay taxes and we have to pay taxes? So it's just a bunch of context here.
It goes on and on and on and on. With the negative consequences for the American citizen are legion. I mean, these people, they come, like you said, they're illegal, they steal IDs. Then they start taking in, with that ID, they take in welfare and different things like that if they can get away with it. And then they go to the ER for healthcare because they can't get turned away and they don't have to pay. And their kids then they have babies that become American citizens automatically. Then they bring kids over and they put those kids in schools and they overburden our system, and our kids aren't learning because half the kids don't speak English. And I mean, I have firsthand evidence of that. My mother was a teacher in Minneapolis. So she complained about how hard it was to teach when half her class didn't speak English. And even though they would be like shuttled in and out to their English lessons and stuff like that, it was still really difficult for her. It became really difficult.
Yeah, language is important to teach.
You end up having to teach to the bottom. I was reading oh my God, there's a guy who's I wish I could remember. He's like a Somali who is in a position of authority now I know. He's the principal of the high school that my brother went to, in Minneapolis. A Somali guy. And in his little bio, he says, I had no education until I was 12. So he came into this country at age 12 and was plopped into the inner city, which is already really struggling, inner city public school system that my mother taught in at 12 with no education at 12. And he's still probably very ignorant. And now he's running the school. And that's where they had like this big, the kids kidnapped him and took him hostage because they said he was a liar and a sneak. I don't know who's telling the truth. But it's just like, that's the kind of stuff going on in Minneapolis right now, where the school is just totally chaos. And the guy running it didn't have an education until he was 12. And that's what we get. That's what the American citizen now has to deal with if Yaron Brook is in charge. It's fine. Suck it up. Deal with it.
Speaking of Yaron Brook, he was asked if Tom Homan was a fascist. And while to his credit, he won't go that far, he does say that Homan's a nasty human being before claiming that anyone for illegal immigration is against all immigration.
A really, really nasty human being. He's a bad human being and a nasty human being who is willing to you know, do anything in order to achieve his numbers. Right? He is anti-immigration. I don't buy this. Anybody who's really anti-illegal immigration is also anti-immigration. Everybody who's anti-illegal immigration is also anti-immigration, because none of them propose as the solution for illegal immigration to legalize it. Make immigration easier. To allow more people to immigrate to the United States legally.
That's actually funny.
It's just completely absurd. I mean, Yaron has reached new levels of ridiculousness. And to call Tom Homan just a nasty person without providing many, many examples of how he's nasty, it's just ridiculous. And it's not fair. It's not an example of rational thought or argument. And then he's to say, you know, if you're against illegal immigration, you're against all immigration. It's just absurd. It's not even worth talking about. We should just ignore Yaron Brook completely. He's just not making any sense. As if you can't have a nuanced view of immigration. You can't recognize that we need to check people at the border, and if you're crossing illegally, then that's a problem. But we don't have a problem with people who go through the ports and cross legally. I mean, that's completely rational. It's a rational take on immigration. It's what most people think. You know,
yeah, what about the people that want legal immigration at its current levels or even lower, but don't want it eliminated? Like we were saying, there's a rate of integration, and you know, I mean, it's a circular argument. So if you're against illegal immigration, you can't be for legal immigration unless you're trying to legalize immigration. I mean, you know, if you're for the current level of immigration, Yaron declares you impossible. He doesn't believe you. You've been psychologized.
He's just dropped all context and even just is evading the view he had in that lost episode that he scrubbed from the internet. You know, he used to recognize the fact that you need to check people for certain criminality and diseases and stuff, and that's very important to maintaining our national sovereignty and even our culture. So it's just he's evading a whole swath of facts and evidence against this stupid, ridiculous position that you should legalize illegal immigration. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, in this next clip, Onkar Ghate and Ben Baer from the Ayn Rand Institute talked about the LA riots. And in this clip, they seem more upset that the violence of the riots gives their opponents a talking point.
Part of the injustice here is that there's a real smearing of immigrants as they're all criminals, rapists, and there's millions of them. And if that were true, you would be scared to go walk out in the evening in most American cities. So it's like an obvious smear, but you can't help their cause by resorting to violence, and they'll say, like, see, we told you this is what they're like. And even though it's not representative, if you really care about it, you would go out of your way to make sure if you have any kind of protest, that it will not and cannot descend into violence. And that certainly doesn't look like what happened here.
The real problem is that they show their true colors, and we got to keep trying to convince the Americans to take hordes and hordes of third worlders by pretending that none of them are violent.
Well, first of all,
is that his take for real?
He's first of all, he's smearing the opponents of illegal immigration. He's saying that the opponents of illegal immigration are, you know, calling all immigrants nasty or bad.
Right.
That's not the case. He says that he uses immigrants, but not illegal immigrants. So that makes us look like we're taking a stand against all immigrants. And that's just, I mean, I don't know anybody who does that. And so he's creating this straw man opponent. And then he's also pointing out, so one of the good things is that he recognizes that these rioters or so-called protesters are helping the cause of their opponents by acting violent and acting like bad illegal immigrants who commit crimes. And so he recognizes that, but then he's saying it's not representative. Well, then who the hell is representative of illegal immigrants? You know, these are the representatives on the streets. These are the people representing the illegal immigrants. And so they are criminals. They are the rioters. And Onkar needs to recognize that and deal with that fact. You know, so first of all, we're not talking about all immigrants. I have no problem with Mexicans who come across legally. You know, one of my girlfriends was a Mexican immigrant. So, you know, I don't have a problem with these people. I have a problem with the criminal element who doesn't obey the law and is probably doing something, you know, nasty or illegal.
I have a lot of immigrants in my life. I love them. I've helped some people immigrate here. I just signed an affidavit testifying to the marriage legitimacy of a friend of mine, a family friend who is immigrating here and got, because she fell in love and got married. I mean, it is a lie. It is a smear. And the other thing I will mention that as a woman, there is not a major city in America that I feel safe walking at night in. I think that at this point it is, especially obviously in certain neighborhoods. There have always been bad neighborhoods in big cities. But, and this is not illegal immigration, but just to use the example of just when you have third world, the third world is not safe. I don't go to Mexico City and walk around at night. I can't, I don't go to, I don't know, just name another city in another country that I don't, besides El Salvador, maybe there's so it's, I think that is in itself kind of like a weird thing to say. Minneapolis, where I lived in college, I lived downtown, and I used to study and hang out at this coffee shop a few blocks from my house, from my apartment. And I used to walk that route like it was quiet and dark, 2 a.m. I was probably okay. Today, I would never do it. It's a different town.
Yeah, the culture changes and immigration accelerates that process. Speaking of smears, in this next clip, Yaron calls ICE cowards for wearing masks.
Why is ICE agents masked? Because they're afraid. They're afraid for their lives. If they show their face, people are going to come after them, right? ICE is afraid. So it uses the same tactics that the supporters of Hamas and university campuses use. They use the same tactics as the rioters are using, or some of the rioters are using in LA right now. They use the same tactics as, cowards everywhere use. What exactly are they afraid of? Their lives are going to be threatened, really? They're threatening people's lives, but they are law enforcement officers. They should be held accountable for what they do. Part of that accountability is not covering your face. It is authoritarian regimes that have their police, their law enforcement, cover their face. For exactly that reason, they do not want to be held accountable.
This is like the height of irrationality for him. First of all, he recognizes that they're afraid. And they're afraid because they get doxxed. These people are taking pictures of them and then, threatening them and their families. And so what Yaron is actually advocating is tolerating this sort of violent threats against police so that you won't have any police anymore. Because no one's going to want to enforce the law if they got to put their family at risk. And so this is what Antifa wants. And this is what Yaron is saying, is calling them cowards, because they're not they're not bowing down to Antifa. They're trying to do their job, and doing their job requires them to wear these masks and conceal their identity from these violent people who will then go after their families. So Yaron is just, he's appeasing them. He's siding with the violent Antifa rioters and saying, you're cowards, ICE agents, because you're hiding your face. And he's using these ridiculous correlation between authoritarian regimes and even Antifa who hide their faces. Like, correlation is not causation.
This is a Hitler drank water, and therefore, if you drink water, you're Hitler example.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's like he's saying they use the same tactics, so therefore they're the same types of people. No, I mean, Hitler used guns. We use guns. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's the lowest form of thinking. It's not reasoning. He doesn't understand fallacies. He's just at the height of his ridiculous absurdity.
William, to your point, Todd Lyons, the acting director of ICE, has a different explanation for the masks.
2 weeks ago in Los Angeles, where we ran an operation where ICE officers were doxxed. So let's just say that again. People are out there taking photos of the names, their faces, and posting them online with death threats to their family and themselves. So I'm sorry if people are offended by them wearing masks, but I'm not going to let my officers and agents go out there and put their lives on the line and their family on the line because people don't like what immigration enforcement is.
Right. He's exactly right. I mean, why should any rational person have to put their family on the line just to enforce the law? The problem here is that you have lawbreakers who are very violent and, are organized to the point where they can send hit squads after your family. And like,
how are we living in that world? I mean, does Yaron ever ask himself, why do we even have that situation where these men have to be masked in order to protect their families? I mean, he's so focused on that instead of on the threat. Why 20, 30 years ago, I did not live in a country where ICE had to wear masks.
I think
why do they now?
On some level, he agrees with this open immigration, and so he sees it as like this justified reaction to the Gestapo tactics of ICE.
Well, well, first of all, I don't think he knows what he believes. He's just out there trying to get clicks and subscribers and appealing to the left-leaning element of the objectivist or libertarian sphere. He's acting like he doesn't have the full context, but how could he not have the full context for this? This is just basic law enforcement. This is basic stuff, and he should know this. And I think he's consciously evading a whole bunch of facts and context, so that he can then spew out things like ICE agents are cowards.
He's got to take this law and order view, but in his heart of hearts, he's looking for any excuse to denigrate ICE. In fact, in this next clip, a questioner says they're proud of the people of LA who stood up, and Yaron agrees.
This Gestapo has got to stop. I'm proud of the people in LA who stood up. We have to do this everywhere. We have to let this administration know that peaceful workers in the United States should not be treated as criminals. I agree with you completely. I wish the people in LA had restrained themselves and stuck to protesting rather than engaging in violence. Even if it turns out I started the violence, they should not retaliate with violence.
Oh my God. One of the things that they do is that they always are giving this irrational benefit of the doubt, I guess. Like, every immigrant is this benevolent, hardworking person who isn't going to do anybody any harm. And they never take advantage of systems and which we've already discussed, that of course they're a huge burden on this country. But they always want to say, it's just let's take the ideal illegal who comes here, they work, they don't cause any problems. They're not criminals. In general, they're not criminals. And they want everybody to fit that description, and they automatically apply that. And they automatically want all of those protesters to be just standing up for the rights of the nicest people possible. But unfortunately, they turn out to be violent criminals as well. It's like the same kind of weird benefit of the doubt. Like, we're just, even if when we see them pelting bricks and disabling 10 cop cars under a bridge and, burning things down and waving the Mexican flag, we're just going to assume that these are the hardworking, good immigrants. And they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't do that because it's not good for their cause. Like, how could...
If Yaron was actually for the hardworking illegal immigrant, he would be against the criminal illegal immigrant, because those are the ones that ICE has warrants for. ICE goes after people with, they have warrants for criminal behavior. Like they were going after customs violations or something in LA. And then because they went after that business, they then found a bunch of illegal immigrants working there. So it's because of the criminal ones that the otherwise, hardworking ones get caught. So he should be against the criminal element and be pointing that fact out. It's not like ICE just is their main purpose is to go just on the streets and round up everybody. Right. They have warrants and they go to places with the warrants to find criminals. And then they snatch up whoever is there who is illegal.
Just using that violence, ICE started the violence. I mean, whatever happened to the government having a monopoly on the legal use of force? But, he's sanctioning the rioters by saying ICE started it. You can't.
The force started when these illegals came here. That broke the law. And in this case, to William's point, they were actually pursuing a drug and trafficking and like you said, a customs violation. That's what they were other crimes that they were enforcing at that time. So it's all just BS.
Yeah, it makes
it's
no
all
logical
just to
sense.
support he wants to be for open borders. And so he doesn't want there to be any facts that get in the way of that, including, oh no, some of these open borders people got violent, and that was unfortunate.
If you say don't retaliate with violence, but once you've said one side started the violence, you're carrying the implication. I mean, the other side has a right to self-defense if someone else started the violence, even while claiming he doesn't want retaliation.
Well, he doesn't provide any context for why ICE threw a flashbang grenade. I mean, does ICE just randomly throw flashbang grenades around? I mean, I'm sure it had something to do with a crowd forming and threatening them. And if they didn't have any National Guard protection at the time, in the very beginning, then how are they going to protect themselves from this crowd forming? You can't let a crowd or mob form around you and not deal with that threat. That's a threat. And especially if they're spitting on you or calling you vile names and threatening you, which clearly they do in these protests, you have to deal with that threat, and you can't let it get out of control. So Yaron just wants things to get out of control so that ICE then is like in some bloody street battle with the criminal element out there. And he just doesn't have the context, or is evading the context of what law enforcement has to do to stay safe.
He wants ICE to lose, so they have to back down and go back to the status quo. Now, speaking of using lefty talking points, this one I know, Sonny, you had an issue with. Yaron lets us know that illegal immigration is a civil offense, not criminal.
Remember, immigration is not a criminal offense. It's a civil one. It's not a crime to cross the border illegally. I mean, it's not it's a civil offense. But this is being treated as if you're automatically a gang member. It's not a criminal. Wait a minute. Illegal immigration is a civil, not a criminal violation.
He's reading off something. He has no idea what he's talking about. He does not know the law. He doesn't know. He's not a lawyer. He's reading a New York Times blurb from some woke 25-year-old who wrote that, because his uncle told him that, or, where the hell did that come from?
It's
And
an
again,
excuse.
he repeats the smear that I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But again, he equates that if you're against this, you're against like the good person,
Right. I mean, if it's not a crime to cross the border illegally, then why did he recommend shooting criminals that do? I looked it up per Google. In essence, while unauthorized presence is a civil matter, actions like illegal entry or re-entry can lead to criminal charges and penalties. So, illegal entry is illegal immigration. And so I just think, it's an excuse to basically allow the law breaking. It's like, oh, well, it's not even a criminal law, so how can you expect these people to react but to riot in the streets?
Well, he's like nitpicking here because I think the first offense is civil, and then if you re-enter, it's a felony or something. I could be wrong on that, but it's if you do it repeatedly and you get caught, then I think they charge you with some other violation, and it may be a criminal violation. But it's not true that like just because you cross the border, you're a criminal, like violent criminal or something. There's other non-violent acts that you can commit that are criminal, like stealing someone's ID, to work here. So
you're still subject to deportation. I don't know why it matters. I think the difference is if you repeatedly enter, you get put in prison. You can be imprisoned for that. So that's the only difference, is whether or not you get sent back or you get put in jail.
Well, William, to your point about, why this is being done in this last clip, Yaron says that Trump and the right are doing this as a strategy to get the left to riot.
But this is the thing. This is the stupidity of the left and the smart strategically of the Republicans. They know that if they poke and poke and poke and poke, the left will descend into riots. And if they bring in the National Guard, the left will suddenly descend into riots to stand up to the regime, to the government in Washington. And that'll flip the American public, not because they're now racist, but because what they really can't stand is the burning of cars, people waving Mexican flags, people wearing keffiyehs. That they do not want. That they do not want.
Seems like he's advocating appeasement of the violent element. Like all Trump is doing here, all ICE is doing is enforcing the law. So he has a problem with them enforcing the law, which
he doesn't like the law.
And he wants to characterize it as poking the bear.
He said enforcing the law is incitement to violence. That's what he just said.
Yeah, but he can't actually say that. He has to be vague about it. He's like, Trump is like poking them and, making them do things. And that's their strategy, as if it's,
by the way,
if it's not their strategy to just enforce the law. They're and enforcing immigration regulations. So this is the law of the land that he's talking about. And it's not as if they're going after Jews for being Jews. This is a rational sort of regulation that most countries have. Probably all countries have this sort of stuff, and where they enforce the border and have ports of entry and arrest people and deport them. We've been deporting people for hundreds of years. So like I don't know what his problem is with ICE agents. It's just he has a problem with the law, and then he's taking it out on the ICE agents.
Yeah, that's right. No, I agree. I think all of this comes down to he is for open immigration, and he just wants that. And Yeah, I think it's just like it's crazy to say that. I mean, the other thing to note here is that it is actually the whole tactic on the left to incite not incite violence, but to kind of push a reaction. The action is the reaction is a communist slogan. So they purposely design their protests to go out and provoke law enforcement to react, and then they put that reaction on camera, and then they make it look like they're persecuted when they're really the ones initiating force. So that is actually a very explicit leftist. I think it's a Saul Alinsky tactic. I mean, it's in all of their playbooks. So for him to accuse the right of being better at that or something, which we're totally not, I mean, it's kind of a joke.
He's also saying that, if he calls the National Guard out, then they'll really riot. It's just like, so we're all supposed to walk on eggshells, around the left, never challenging them so that we can't be accused of poking them into violence. I mean, what happens when their criteria for not being violent changes over time? What else are we supposed to give in on? Okay, we can't call out the National Guard to protect the streets. Can we even still call the police? I mean, that was something that came up in 2020 as well. It's the same, defund the police crowd that doesn't want other branches of law enforcement enforcing the law as well. And like I said before, this is the no one's above the law crowd. That's what they were saying.
It's also very disingenuous to pretend like if ICE agents weren't arresting people in LA, then Antifa wouldn't be violent. They're going to find a way. They're going to find a reason to be violent. If it's not ICE, it's going to be something else, and they'll take to the streets. They don't need much of a provocation. You don't need to poke them very hard if that's what you're doing. You just
why
get in
are
their
they
face
so
and they're
quick
violent.
to violent? Why are they so quick to commit violence? He doesn't ask that question.
And why do we have to steer around that?
Yaron should be well familiar with this because he was attacked by Antifa in London when he was giving a speech. They raided the auditorium and shouted down the lecture and stopped him from speaking.
He just stood there and did nothing.
Yeah, I mean, he took their flag. Ooh, big deal. But I mean, he should be on the side of ICE. Like, he should realize that
at least the rule of law.
Causing this. Yeah, ICE isn't poking the bear. It's Antifa is storming the castle. It's a full-on revolt.
It is a full-on revolt, and the American people are clear. They want this immigration thing solved. They were very upset about the open border under Biden, overwhelmingly. And I believe it's a big reason why Trump won.
He ran on doing this.
So, I mean, it is the will of the people as well. The American citizens and a lot of the legal immigrants here want these people out.
We talked a lot about a lot of good stuff. Any final thoughts from either of you?
Going back to, we only had one clip from the Onkar and Ben podcast, but I want to talk about the title they gave that podcast. They called it LA riots and the mass deportations, both evil. So they're trying to call riots, they're trying to say riots and the mass deportations are evil. But then in the podcast, they didn't give hardly any evidence for that. Why are mass deportations evil? I consider this title to be absurd and just not, it shouldn't have come out of an objectivist mouth because it's ridiculous. To call mass deportations evil is ridiculous. If mass immigration is okay, then mass deportations are fine. You have to.
One of their premises. They don't even question it.
Yeah, it's about the numbers. I mean, how are numbers evil? If you have to deport 1,000 people because 1,000 people cross the border illegally, then that's what you do. They're trying to paint the concept of mass deportations as evil. And I think it's
I feel like it's not even that, because what about the mass deportations that happened under Obama and Biden? It's like they only care when Trump does it.
Well, yeah, I think they're very selective in when they make these arguments. And it's when Trump's in control.
Yeah,
And
we didn't
so,
hear anything about this for 4 years from them.
yeah, and
Or let alone
suddenly,
the protesters. I mean, the protesters didn't protest Biden's ICE.
There's probably a lot of catch
yeah,
and release going on.
yeah. So I'm just concerned with like who's forming the basic concepts over there at the Ayn Rand Institute, because it's going awry.
It is
It's
so
not,
off the rails.
yeah,
I don't, and they seem to have like completely disconnected from just like what's happening. And they're just on this like loop of Trump bad, Orange Man bad, Orange Man bad. And it's kind of, I mean, yeah, it's getting to the point where it's crazy. It's really clownish. I, um, I encourage objectivists because I'm seeing among objectivists though comments about the hardworking immigrant, illegal immigrant, and I think that is a context dropping. Like I think it's a play on your sympathy. You look at a human being that is an individual who is maybe doing not a lot wrong. Um, they came here legally, maybe they stole an ID, but that's like it, let's say. They're still causing problems. They still are. They are not here by permission either. And you have to have rule by law, not men. You can't just make exceptions because it hits your feels. And this is what I feel like we're being encouraged to do is like we have this law, but let's make this exception and that exception. And that is not how a rational, objective country works. That's not, how it works. And the consequence of that would be lawlessness and chaos. And the consequence of that is tyranny, because we will have the result is one of two things. We will either descend into a communist tyranny as these people basically, if we back down and if we let the flag waving Antifa criminals, the Mexican flag waving criminals take over the country, we have basically the Tim Walz type people in charge. We have, I don't know, somebody go just Google and look up the Minneapolis City Council. Just look at them. You will see a lot of 20-year-old communists running the city of Minneapolis now.
They voted to defund the police before Floyd happened.
I mean, the things going on there that is the rest, or even just California. They gave amnesty in the mid 80s to all of these illegals, and the country and the state immediately flipped to permanent Democrat supermajority, and it will never be Republican again. And so now you have these people are doing things like saying if you have sex with a child, like between 12 and 18 or whatever, like it's like 12 years old is the cutoff now. You can have sex with a 13-year-old and that's not considered rape. They're passing all these weird like kinky sex laws and trans laws and stuff, and it's all coming out of San Francisco City.
I don't even know if that has to do with immigration, but
no, I mean it doesn't. Left. But I'm saying like it is the left. That's what I'm saying is that the immigration
they're counting on the immigrants to vote.
That is exactly what is happening. Yeah. The immigration feeds the left, and the communists will make partnership, which is what they've done in Minnesota with these third world immigrants. And that goes for legal too. That goes for legal mass third world immigration, which Americans also don't want. And that supports the left and the communist agenda. So you will either have that, or at some point you will have a crackdown that makes this ICE stuff look tame. You will have tyranny. You will make way for the American citizen to say, I've had it. Give me the strong man who's going to clean up my streets and clean up my city and get rid of all of these third worlders. And then you will see atrocities. Like either way, you will see atrocities like you cannot believe. We don't want either one of those. And the chaos that is being created by this is leading us down into one of those two paths as a country.
Well, thank you for that positive vision of the future.
Well, I want to say I want to say something about, this idea that we're going to have some, you know, like a authoritarian force cracking down on immigrants or something. This assumes that the normal American or regular American is very depraved and hasn't learned anything from history. And I don't think that's the case. I think we're in a situation where historically the average American is pretty good, is kind-hearted, is very tolerant, and they're not going to descend into some Nazism where they're just going to start rounding up people who don't look like them. First of all, we're very multicultural. I mean, I don't believe in multiculturalism, but we have several cultures that have assimilated to the American way of life. And so I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a rational sort of immigration control. It's the real problem here is that you have these communists and these Antifa people and these Mexican invaders who think this is Mexico, and they're all kind of forming this rebellion, and they don't want the American life. They want the racism. They want the socialism.
You can add to that the Hamas supporting the literal racist, anti-Semitic Hamas supporting protesters who are in the same. They're just waving the Mexican flag now. Because they're wearing the keffiyeh and or whatever you say that.
And the real struggle here is how are good-hearted Americans going to deal with this really big problem? And I think they're going to find a solution. I think as long as Trump and someone with some semblance of decency is in charge and can put good people in charge, then we're going to have a respectable solution to this problem. And it's not going to involve concentration camps where we kill everyone we don't like, and that's not going to happen anymore. That happens in communist countries. It doesn't happen here.
Yeah, I think that's what she was saying, that if nothing is done, but I think Trump being elected and starting to implement this in a rational way is a positive step.
William, I agree with you, but what I was saying is projecting longer term. If it continues, and if you look at a place like the UK, where if it continues and they don't stop, it is getting to the point where there will be civil war of some kind, where the English do round up people who don't look like them and kick them out, because this was a 95% English country. I mean, we're different because, like you said, we kind of always have been multicultural. And so we had the Black population and the Indian population and we had a lot of different European populations intermixing in the early last century. So it has always been sort of part of our culture, I guess, to integrate newcomers. And, but there's a point where, and by the way, go talk to an American Black and they're pissed too. Like, this is not racial. This is about Americans. And like you said, a lot of the regular Hispanic immigrants too. They don't like this illegal immigration.
That's how Trump got Black and Hispanic support in the election.
Yeah.
But this has been a great conversation. We'll let it continue in the comments section. And I'm Scott Schiff, along with William Swig and Sonny Lohman. This has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club, and we'll see you next time.